we are recording this because we just want to share this information to the world after we finish this call. So today is all about investors and who and why are angel investors and venture capitalists investing during COVID. We've had, great reports from all different kinds of groups and individuals, and one of the really main people who's driving a ton of access to capital is the amazing Mysty Rusk, who is the director of the Brink SBDC. And we're just really thrilled and honored to have her part of this. She has come to San Diego and revolutionized how we think about investment, really being able to advocate and raise up the next set of angel investors alongside a group of wonderful fund managers. Benton Moore is on. I'm trying to look at all the list here. Other people, no. So we have great fund managers that help alongside Mysty, and I am one of the fund managers from last year and this year. So we're really excited about having those conversations. So without further ado, I want to have Mysty. I know I introduced you, Mysty, but if you can really talk a little bit about, and I always put you on the spot about your own personal angel investing, but what has transpired in the San Diego Angel Conference, and especially during COVID, because this COVID series is really specific on during this time. There are some things that we can learn as we're going through it, and it's every single day something's changing, right? So we're hearing from the front lines, and the front lines is definitely Mysty. Before you start, Mysty, just quickly, if you do have a question, please put it in the chat. April and Raven and myself are going to be looking at that. I'm going to be asking Mysty questions, responding. Put things in the chat, raise your hand, and we will have a great amount of content right now, and then we'll go into question and answer afterwards. So without further ado, Mysty, do you want to start and just kind of talk about what kind of angel investor you are, and a little bit about the SDAC, and then we'll go into COVID.
Okay, so quickly, I grew up on a cattle ranch, and so I invest with my family, and we primarily invest in things that are agriculture related. So I always say there's a funny little story. We invest in things that are in Colorado that improve sandy, rocky soil at a high altitude, and that my dad can go and shake hands with, right? So we're pretty much devices. We only have a handful of investments, and they're all very directly related to the work that we do at the ranch. With that said, I fell into this work some years ago, and got my first exposure to angel investing maybe 2000. I'd heard of it maybe back in the early 2000s, and I thought it was a joke. I was like, wait, there's like people running around and they're like writing people checks that people they don't know, and like it just seems like this sort of a mean joke. And then I relocated from Kansas to Oregon and found out that angel investors were actually a very real thing, and started working directly with a kind of a cool group of angels. Launched an angel conference there, and when I came to San Diego a couple of years ago, I realized that people who were actively working in the angel investing space had lots and lots of deals to look at, and they weren't having to write a whole lot of checks. So people would say things to me like, we looked at 1,100 deals last year. Really? That's awesome. How many did you fund? 8. Whoa, 8 out of 1,100. That's crazy. And my day job, I run the Brink SBDC, which is hosted at University of San Diego. We're an accelerator. We help companies across every kind of industry and at every stage. They just have to be innovation focused. And so as that numbers continue to grow, we need more and more places for our companies to land. And an angel conference is a really, really great way to transform high net worth individuals into active angel investors. So over the last 2 years, we've built relationships with nearly 300 angel investors in the San Diego area. And we've had, Benton can say the numbers, or Amy Duncan, she's the current fund manager. So I just want to say I'm blessed to have 3 fund managers like on your meeting tonight. Silvia's fund manager for Fund 1. Benton is the fund manager for Fund 2, and Amy Duncan is the fund manager for Fund 3. And so they can talk to that. But Benton kind of knows these numbers. Maybe he can pop in and help us out. I think we're like 85. What's the actual number of investors over the last 2 years?
We had 52 this year and 32 the year before, which is 84.
So just over 80 new angel investors. Some of them seasoned, but many of them brand new. And what we did was we gave them a place to get to know each other, to build their network of other investors, to look at a lot of deals and learn alongside each other, and to figure out what's important. So people came in the room and they were intrigued because they'd read a book or they heard a newspaper, like they saw a newspaper article or they heard a podcast somewhere or something, and got their way to us. But like all of these concepts are new, like what's an investor thesis? And, you know, like, and so by the end of it, people are clear, like, I didn't know what my thesis was when I started, but now I know that it's not that, and it might be something like this, right? Like, so they you know, everybody finds their own way through. You make some friends, and the hope is they do our process once, costs $6,000 to get your first unit, $5,500 for every unit after that. And then once you do it, we hope you'll come back and play with us again, but we really, really want to see investors step out, write checks on their own, work with friends to write check, start their own funds. You know, we're really interested in the proliferation of the system. So over the last 2 years, pretty common occurrence, somebody will come to me in the middle of the process and say, I have met privately with this company. You know, it doesn't even matter what you guys do. I want to invest in this one. Like, it's a good fit for me. And, you know, like I'll get those requests and I'll say, write a check, right? There's like nothing in our whole process that tries to stranglehold anybody. Like our goal is to help move the money. So we want to see our companies get funded at the Brink. We want to see the San Diego ecosystem grow. And we want to give investors the skills they need to push forward.
So this is why I love Mysty. She just goes on and she's just like saying, yeah, I just do this so easily and I have 3 fund managers. It's not that easy. She talked about a couple of things that I love to like just highlight. Building relationships, that's something that we really wanted to talk about today. And you see that not just
I want to wait till the girls get here.
What? Oh, I'm sorry. You're hearing that founders need to build relationships, but just as Missy said, angel investors also have to build relationships. So that's one thing that I pulled out, right? And also another piece of San Diego Angel Conference that I love is that it's actively building that network and actively doing something together, actively doing due diligence, and then actively writing checks. So Missy and I are kind of like built from the same mold, is that write a check people, right? So investors, we say, if you're aspiring angel investors or existing angel investors, write that check for that entrepreneur. So those kinds of things kind of hit, not a wall, but hit a challenge, right, during COVID. Because how do you build networks when we are all, shelter in place? Video and virtual experiences were not the norm. Now they kind of are a little bit. Talk to us about that, Mysty, about, those things that you were saying that were so important about investing for that investor network to grow and to write those checks. How did that change when COVID came about for that investor? And then we'll go into kind of the founder. How can they help themselves to get in front of those investors? But let's just kind of put a photograph together of that time and place for those investors that are building that network for SDAC.
You want me to talk just about how the COVID-19 has impacted investing with our
yes, with SDAC in general,
okay.
But then also if you want to talk about more about the overall investing landscape. We can talk about that as well, but I just think that that's something really important, because a lot of founders come, and I know that you get this too. Well, I want to get a check and I want to get investment, but they're not writing checks. Are they writing checks? What are they doing? How do I build a relationship in COVID? How do I do that? What are they thinking? But they have to think about it, that the investors are also thinking those same kind of challenges, and how have they gone forwards with that, and especially with SDAC as an active example of how we moved forward as investors to write those checks during COVID.
Right. So the first thing that happened, so our angel conference, SDAC, was scheduled to happen on March the 30th. And when did the actual shutdown happen? I don't know. That's all blur for me. Like the 22nd or the 20th, something like that. Somewhere in that window, we were still physically having meetings with the investors. And I walked in one night and I said, "There's a one-page memo in front of you. We've got choices here." And I gave them three. I don't remember exactly what they were, but one choice: let's give the investors back their money, tell the companies we're sorry, and we'll see you next year. That was one of the options. One of the options was like, whatever, go forward in some kind of physical format. And the third was to try and move to online. And then basically I just said, does anybody want option one? Or maybe somebody in the room said, I don't want option one. You know, I remember saying, I personally hate option one. And I just said, we just want a chance, like, just give us a week to see what we can figure out in the next 7 days. And from that point, that might have been around the 15th of March or something like that. Over a period of 19 days, like 8 days from the time we found out we would not be able to meet in person at all, 11 pivots to be able to pull that off. And all of a sudden I understood what I'm coaching businesses about every day. Like, as we embrace that, like, we will, you know, persistence is key, and, you know, we will get through this no matter what. And we're just going to press and press and press until there are no options left. You know, like, so I kept waking up every morning, and sometimes a lot in the middle of the night, and I would say, like, do I still have options? Yes, I still have options. I still have cancel, we still have online, we still have small group, you know, like, whatever. And those options just kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And I think Benton and I were talking the night before the Angel Conference, must have been close to midnight. And I said, what happens if the electricity goes out or the internet goes down? Like, I'm down to that, right? Like, those are the next terrible things that could happen. And we had those problems worked out. By the time we started the next morning, we knew that there was a backup generator, and they had redundant Wi-Fi, like, to the space where we were going to be video casting, right? So we even had backup plans for the craziest things. So we weren't the only ones. We had a ton of investors in that time frame, and a ton of businesses that just stuck to it. Like, just, you know, this work is important, the timing is critical, we can't afford to back down, and we just stayed with it, like, the whole group. Not only did we see, so at the time when things really started to change, I think we had maybe, Benton, maybe you know these numbers too, 300,000 secured among the investors, 310, something like that, some number less. And then even as the whole world was shutting down, we had investors continuing to write checks and make commitments to the fund. We had $400,000 committed on the morning of, and we finished with $506,000, right? So,
and a lot of it by checks in the mail.
By checks in the mail. So, and we were able to, over the last 2 years, we funded 6 companies to the tune of just over $1 million. But the important thing is we did it at $5,000 a pop, right? Like, so it's a lot. That's a huge, huge number of people making big commitments of time to see that part through. Since then, we have seen companies that participated continue to get to meet with angels and continue to raise money. So all of the companies that we funded, plus the one or two that were right behind them, have all made additional funding progress. And I don't know if we can, like, say, like, who's working with who or any of those kinds of things, but the important part is they all are still at the table getting to make pitches, still in due diligence with other processes. Of the group that I serve, so of the Brink companies that I serve, 817 right now, I think, we saw 5 angel investments the week following the angel conference that weren't affiliated with the conference, to the tune of $2 million. So one of those was a family office. The other 4 were private checks, but 5 deals to the tune of $2 million in the week following that, that was the first week of April, and it hasn't slowed down. So we've seen a whole bunch of people withdraw, like people that we were actively working with sort of have disappeared, and money from the sidelines has poured in. Like, this is the time. Where did the really big winners come from the last, like the really big winners that we're seeing right now, Uber, Airbnb, those kinds of companies, they came out of the last recession. So we're seeing a lot of talk about that among angels, and a lot of doubling down, asking lots of good questions, looking for fresh opportunities, and really hungry entrepreneurs, and capable business models, and all of those kinds of things.
So I would love to dissect that a little bit, because there's a lot in there for a lot of people on the call. So a couple of things, and I'll do like 4 of them at a time. One of them is, why was it so important? Let's talk about an event fund. So there's different kinds of funds that are out there, and that's why that was a prerogative to be able to fund that day. So let's dive into that. Secondly, I heard that was the core. There was a sense of that there was a core group of angels and entrepreneurs that wanted to stay active. They were tenacious, and that kind of went through all of it. And I just want to touch on that one more time. And third is, I heard you saying that doubling down, and what does that mean? So let's just take 3 right there. So number 1 would be event fund. Number 2 is, what's that core? Let's kind of talk about that a little bit. And thirdly, what does doubling down mean?
Okay.
I'll remind you too.
Yeah, I'm scribbling notes. All right, so an event fund, when you're talking about angel investing, there are a bunch of different ways that it happens. You can have an individual investor who writes a fairly large check to an individual company, and that's like sort of been the most common thing we've seen done in the past. Those checks are usually $25,000 to $100,000. Probably most of them work much closer to the 25,000 space. Those investors source their own deals. They review their own, they review all the materials, they do their own due diligence, and then they make their investment decisions. And so all the risks is just on them, and whatever the resources individually bring to bear. And then you see let's say like the professionally managed funds. So angel funds, a bunch of people put money together. You hire some professional or group of professionals to manage that for you. Those are usually much bigger. You usually put some chunk of money in, $50,000 or $100,000, and that gets you into several deals because you have a professional manager. The downside of that one is investors don't learn a lot. So they might have some information rights, they might get some reports, but they don't get into the nitty-gritty like evaluation of the deals. A member managed fund is one where the people who put the money in actually manage the money in the fund. So maybe you're going to put in $50,000 or $100,000, and you're going to become part of a committee. You're going to end up on a due diligence committee, or you're going to be on an application review committee. You work as a group to source deals, and then you invest as a group. You have some rulemaking decision that says, a super majority or simple majority vote to be able to move something to due diligence, and then get a recommendation from a committee, and then you vote again, and then you write a check. That's the TCA. No, that's not the TCA model. TCA model is a network. So then a member managed fund is where you pull the money to begin with, and then the fund doles the money out. And then an angel network would be sort of the TCA model. So it's a group of individual investors who get together to source deals, but they individually write checks.
And TCA is Tech Coast Angels for anybody who's out there who doesn't know that.
Yep, Tech Coast Angels is the big player in San Diego. Tech Coast Angels also has a fund. You can pay, what's the fund price? 11,000 to get a unit in the ACE fund? 10,000 to get a unit in the ACE fund. And then they look at deals as a group and they move the money pretty quickly. And so for your $10,000, you can have a small share of an entire portfolio. And I don't remember what they did the first round, but it was 18 or 22 deals, something like that. So it's a nice group of companies. And then the last major way that angel investing works is the angel event fund. So a group of investors get together, you identify a fund manager, it's a member managed fund, but you make the promise that you will invest your funds in a company that presents as part of a process at the grand finale event of a particular event on a particular day. So that's what we're running in San Diego, and it's a lower price to play, and then it has some of those other benefits. You get to work with other investors, you source deals as a group, you review deals as a group, you make a decision as a group, and then you have somebody who agrees to take on the management risk. In this case, Amy or Benton or Silvia. All right, so that's the first question, different kinds of angel.
That's great. No, I love that, because that was the reason why we had to really, as SDAC during COVID, not be like, oh, we'll just do it in the fall. It's okay. We had to really do it at the time that we were not had to, but we really had to have that part of our decision-making process, as all of our investors were having that kind of decision-making process. So that was why I wanted to kind of go in on that there are some parameters that during COVID you have to acknowledge. Secondly is like there's this core aspect of the investors that were part of this fund. You said tenacity, that they grit, determination to get this done. And was that more of like the San Diego ecosystem building? I just wanted to make sure that we didn't lose anything of that kind of the soft skills or the soft reasons why the fund was so important to do at the time that we had to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it was all of those things. So one, I think Benton did a beautiful job, probably did 5 times as much work this year as a normal fund manager would have to do. It was a brutal amount of extra work of personal phone calls and a plethora of emails and just, reassuring people's nerves. Like our last in-person meeting, most of our group was talking about having lost 30% of their net worth in the stock market in the previous week. I mean, that's brutal to say, and you guys want to stay here and do this? But by the time we'd gotten to that point, we'd spent 3 months working on things, and those companies had spent 3 months before that getting it together. And by then we knew some of those companies didn't have a ton of runway. And this money was critical money about not just how fast they were going to scale, but whether they'd survive at all. And we put extra layers. Everybody who was still in the game at that point had to put together a COVID response plan that got reviewed by the team, and just all of those things. So it was sort of that combination of I would say that the best way I can describe it is, like, by then we'd built such a strong community
and trust.
Committed. There was tremendous amount of trust, and there was this huge commitment from the investors to the entrepreneurs, from the entrepreneurs to the process. There was just, it's hard to describe what happens when people come to the table with like a sort of an open mind and an interest in learning. And one of the things I love about how the San Diego Angel Conference ecosystem has, like, just in that smaller group, a high degree of respect, very little grandstanding. It's okay to come in there and make mistakes, and everybody gets to learn a little bit, and it's okay to say you don't understand. And then, and to have somebody like Amy is the perfect example, and I've used hers. She could take some biotech concept that's really freaking complicated, and she could just sort of untwist it, and all of a sudden she's talking about like this little group of things, or talking to this little group of things, and then what happens is they go on a walk together, and then all of a sudden, like, I understand this really fairly complicated diagnostic process or something. And so we all just, every time we get together, everybody's skills come up a little bit because everybody's bringing something to the table. So I don't know if it's fair to ask our other group, or like our other fund managers, to jump in and share anything.
Well, that knowledge share is so important, right? To bring all that up week after week. And that reciprocity of trust between the entrepreneur, because we have some entrepreneurs on the line and some investors on the line. That reciprocity of trust is built up over months at a time. But let's say something like COVID kind of exacerbated that trust, but in a positive way, right? Saying we need to be there for each other. Benton, I know you unmuted yourself, so I wanted to make sure that you put your 2 cents in for that kind of the soft skills that happened during this COVID crisis, and how did we bring those investors and entrepreneurs together?
Thanks for letting me put my 2 cents in. My dos pesos, as always. Yeah, it's about entrepreneurs and investors carrying each other, and one of the best ways to understand what we did when we switched to digital and kept things going, and 100% of the investors agreed to stay in, was to look at this as just another startup crisis. How are the CEOs going to respond? And we got an opportunity to practice what we teach about pivoting and figuring out new lean ways of doing business. And we got to do that in the course of less than 2 weeks. So it was a great stress test for the investors as well as the entrepreneurs. And I think a lot of investors got to feel what it feels like to be a startup entrepreneur.
Yeah, and I loved how we pivoted to, Misty said that a little bit about a COVID response plan. So again, for the founders on the line, is that we asked the entrepreneurs to say, what is your plan? And it was sometimes a letter of saying, this is what we're doing. We are cutting our team in half, or we are asking for manufacturers to, look at our manufacturing costs and see if we can find something cheaper, or have some kind of other negotiation process. There was a lot of different things that you could build as a startup, saying, how can I cut costs? How can I deepen partnerships? How can I leverage something that have never leveraged before? And we asked those founders to do that. And that was something that was put into the due diligence report, which is typically not put in there, right? But that goes back to risk. So that risk mitigation, as Misty said, the entrepreneurs were part of a 3-month process to get them to day one. And then they've been working with investors from that day one of when the investors came in to that COVID piece, right? So you're looking at de-risking. All of that time is de-risking of those investments. And then that COVID plan also sits on top of that due diligence report. So that's why I just wanted to kind of, tease it apart a little bit. Another thing that my third piece from a long time ago was, what does doubling down mean? And I think I've heard that as our Next Wave Impact Fund, we double down on existing portfolio companies within our fund, and we decrease the amount of new investments that we would go into. So instead of looking at 4 new investments, we looked at 2 new investments, and we doubled down on 4 of our portfolio companies. So Misty, do you want to give some more examples of what you've seen during COVID, even at SDAC or other ways, just to define that doubling down and why that's important during COVID?
Right, so I think investors usually use doubling down as going back and putting an additional investment in a company they're already invested in. I think that's the way to say it. I think a lot of times when I say doubling down, I also mean an effort. And I've seen Noemi Pena pop here for a second. I don't know where she went.
She's here.
I think Noemi's on our team. There's no way. Here she comes. Woohoo! Noemi's on our team. There's no way, and I've said this a lot of times, there's no way that we could pull stuff off if she wasn't part of our group. So, and I know that as we're moving into like, we lettered the contingency plans, contingency plan D, contingency plan E, contingency plan F. Like it just seemed endless. There were a number of times where Noemi was like, Misty, is it enough yet? Like, have we tried hard enough yet? And I'm like, we still have two options here, right? Like, I still see there's like still a path forward. We can still make it happen. And I think it was like maybe even the same day as the conference, she's like, huh, we did it. Like, we did it. And, you know, like, it's that, it's the way we say to the world, we can't slow down, not on this, right? Like I say all the time, like I believe in my heart of hearts that we do this work because innovation has the capacity to change the world. Like I say a lot, and maybe save the world. You know, I know that some of the groundwork that happened with our conference this year, very first night out of the gate with investors, we knew we had over 100 deals in the hopper. Some of them very good deals. We knew it was going to be tough to get to the bottom of that. We knew we had this great group from our year one group that were coming back, and how are they going to blend with our year two group? And Ben stood up and said something like super smart, like, you know, I just decided I was going to do this last year, and I hoped I'd meet some nice people along the way. And it turns out if I was getting married tomorrow, some of these people would be standing with me. You know, like I made some of my best friends here. He said something like that. Like Ben says it, and he says it beautiful, made me cry. So, but I think that was a big part of this experience. We didn't end up with any of the 6 companies that were finalists that had direct connection to COVID-19. I do have other companies that were working on it that didn't even apply for the conference because they're in a different place. They weren't quite ready to raise funds or whatever, but they're, you know, like I know that for us to solve the world's big problems and the crisis, it's not the one that we're in. I mean, of course, the one that we're in, but the ones that are ahead of us, the ones we are still not planning for or expecting. Like, innovation is the thing that's going to take us through and help us survive. And so, like, I think we play every day that way. Noemi keeps showing up for work, which I totally appreciate and love. And not only that, but like, we have a team that really believes that this work is that important, like that people's lives depend on it, because they do, like in a very real way. We help entrepreneurs put food on the table, support their families, put their kids through college. It's family vacations. It's good relationships. It's all of those kinds of things that's the really, you know, that's the stuff that keeps us driving forward. Not just like the super sexy little gizmo that you pick up at the, like those are fun. But at the end of the day, it's always about the people and the communities that we build, the families that we support.
That's why I love Misty. She's amazing. She's so inspirational, so nice. But that is really what, like, when that crisis hit, that is the feeling, to be honest with you, in the room for those investors. So think about it. If you're the founder in the room, that's what investors think about during this time. And the investors are like, we want to get the best entrepreneurs to get our checks, right? And that kind of trust and reciprocity is so important. So we have about 8 more minutes of just kind of talking to Misty, and we'll open up for questions. I know that there's making sure that we get the questions on the chat. I have some of the questions. So one of them was, what is the founder? It's the founder is the entrepreneur, the entrepreneur that is starting their startup, that's starting their business. That is the founder of the company. And usually it's either a co-founder or a founder it's in of itself, or a founding team as well. So I just wanted to define that. Thank you for that question. I know there's a question up front that I want to wait until 5:45 when we open up to question and answer. One of the things that I know has come up a lot, and this is kind of a broader topic, Misty, is that what we've talked about investor thesis. So hopefully everybody understands that. It's the thesis that an investor says, I want to invest in, like for me, it's I want to invest in female-led businesses and people of color that have an innovative product. I want to have information rights. We did not define that, but information rights is I just want to have information on the different rounds that people go through and the startups and how they're going forwards. I don't care where that comes from, but that is my investment thesis. And I have a whole paragraph. I can share it with you guys. I'll just post on my LinkedIn, go to my LinkedIn and find that. But Misty, the question is that we saw a little bit of how do you mitigate risk during COVID, right? So we found that out by saying, okay, a founder or entrepreneur, please provide a COVID response letter or document that we can see. How has risk changed? Because that's the biggest thing for investors. It's that risk mitigation that will allow them to write that check. So what has changed in your, like what you're seeing is that investors are seeing as a heightened risk, or what are they asking about that risk or that risk mitigation strategy that's changed because of COVID?
Right. I think the primary change is we see that question right up at the top. How's COVID-19 changed your response to things? What are you doing to change your offerings? And risk happens in a bunch of ways. You have product risk, you have customer risk, you have channel risk, you know, like if you've got financial risk, you've got access to capital risk, you know, like it's all of, you know, like there's no, the space that we're operating in the world is entirely unprecedented. Like I can't benchmark this against, you know, like how many of us have lived, I was a little kid in the recession of the 80s. You know, I remember my parents talking about it, but I don't remember having any connection to it. So for me, like the only recessions I've even lived through were the 2000 tech bubble and the recession of 2008. And those are nothing compared to what's facing us. And could the coronavirus or the COVID-19, could it make us sick and kill a bunch of us? Yep. But I'm to the point now where I'm sincerely concerned about the economic the human implications of the economic conditions, right? I'm sincerely worried about people who've been at home, locked up at home for 60 days, or who lost their jobs or lost their social networks or all of those things. And there's a interesting statistic. I need to go chase down the source for this, but for every 1% that unemployment goes up, death by suicide goes up by 40,000. Like that is a scary, scary statistic. So, and I had the first one of those in my circle, not with my San Diego circle, with one of, you know, another network that that's part of my world. First business owner I know, death by suicide. Like I can't tell you like how important it is to reach out to all your people, right? So you know, like our team is on the line with our, you know, the companies that we serve. You know, like I'm saying that every chance I get to just check in with everybody, just everybody check in on each other, check in on your other people too. So the lady that does my nails, I've checked in. My hairdresser, I checked in with her. Like she and I actually spent kind of a long time on the phone on Saturday because she's not actually doing well. And, you know, like I'm worried, and, you know, we had a good talk about it and pointed her to, you know, like just not being alone is a really critical thing. So as we manage risk, there's a human component of this that's unprecedented. Like I just don't even know. And I said this the first weeks of this thing, you know, we saw in the first like 7 or 10 days of the shutdown, we saw the same economic upheaval in those first week or so that we saw in 14 months around the 2008 recession. It was like everything got shut off all at the same time for everybody all around the world. I mean, and it was like, this is a nutty time. So risk, I don't even know how you assess risk anymore. But what we're doing is being like, be vigorous about your assessment of risk. And then let's figure out how much money is associated with that. You need to do a channel pivot. What's that going to cost? like the full cost of that channel pivot. And then how do we build that into your use of funds? You need to do a product pivot. You need to do a market pivot. You need to do a, you need to recapitalize all of your HR. Like how do you first get a good handle on what that looks like at 8 months, 12 months, 24, 36 months, like give yourself some bandwidth about what it's going to look like. Cause this thing isn't going to be over in the next few days. Like it's not like they're going to say, go back to work and everything is going to go back to the way it was 65 days ago. It's not going to happen. So it's going to take us some time to get there. But if you can identify what those risks are and then say, okay, what does it cost to mitigate that risk? What does it cost to mitigate my sales strategy risk, or my customer acquisition risk, or my product risk, or my, just start to label those up and then identify the dollar figures. And then we've got something we can go talk to angels about. Because when you can sit down with an angel and say, for this amount of money, I can overcome this problem, and then this problem goes away, it's all of a sudden less risky for an investor. It makes it much easier for them to get to a yes.
And I would add to that too is assumptions. So I've been on many calls for doubling down on some of my personal portfolio companies, and also syndicating with other angel investors that want to double down on their portfolio, but they know that I'm more of a mentor to that, let's say, San Diego company. And we talk a lot about assumptions. So like what Misty said, that risk, okay, my risk mitigation process is this for my product, but that investor is going to ask you more. I've seen it more of like, what are your assumptions on that? So then basically be as forthright as possible, saying these are the assumptions that I have to mitigate this risk that is this, therefore I need this much amount of money to get me there. That's a great conversation. That angel investor might know somebody who knows somebody who can get that let's say, whatever is in front of you, or that assumption that you're making might be incorrect, or it might be completely correct. And the angel investor is like, oh my gosh, I know that industry super well. Let's talk further. Awesome. You have an advisor and an investor at the same time. Brilliant, right? So be forthright in those things. So we're at 5:45. I just want to make sure that we answer a couple of questions that have come through the chat. One of the first ones, which was really cool, and I wanted to wait until right now, is that the question was, are pitches moving more online, or pitches have moved to online platforms, ? So I want to answer it first and then put it over to Misty. The Next Wave Impact Fund that I've been talking about over a couple of years, we always do virtual pitch competitions and pitches for our investors. We always have been kind of wanting more people to do that, because some investment groups that are, let's say, New York City or Seattle or San Francisco, want their founders or their entrepreneurs to fly to their locations. We always say, that's just a stupid use of capital. Why don't we just do virtual? So I've seen actually people saying, it's okay, we can do a virtual competition or a virtual pitch to our investors. So I'm thinking that that's a really great thumbs up. I'm not seeing that all pitches will eventually end up all virtual. No, but right now that is our status quo. And I want Misty to answer that as well, whatever you're seeing, and also talk to us about the slow angel conference, so that we just know that that's going, out there. And then also, before you answer, sorry, Misty, there's also a SoCal pitch competition that I know Annie Brown's on the call, can, thank you, Annie, if you don't mind putting it on the chat, for the pitch competition that's coming up in SoCal for the LGBTQ community. Please apply. So that's another possibility, and that's virtual as well. So Misty, do you want to go ahead and kind of talk about what you're seeing in this pitching or pitching competitions or pitching to investors landscape?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. That LGBT thing is May 21st at 5. So we saw that stuff come across this afternoon from one of our contacts at TCA. And I promised I'd help get the word out. So thank you for the reminder.
Yeah, it's going to be in the chat, because Annie, who's leading it, is here on the chat. So
oh, perfect.
Yeah,
perfect.
She'll put it in.
I'd gotten a note from Sonia Steinway. The SLOW, it's called the Central California Angel Conference that happens in San Luis Obispo. That one also went online for June, so a virtual conference. Sort of the cool thing about the virtual conference thing is we drove down the ticket price. So I think they also dropped their ticket price real dramatically to, I don't know, 20, 30 bucks, something like that. So it's like all of a sudden I was able to start inviting investors that I would never have asked to come to San Diego, but like, hey, give me part of your Saturday morning. Let's take a crack at this. So I think we do see a lot of that picking up. All of a sudden it takes a lot less time to organize meetings and get things scheduled, and we're all sitting at our desks because we're not in the car. So like I'm actually seeing my number of meetings is up pretty dramatically because I can stack them back to back, and like I don't have all these transition things. And you know, like for the record, I sort of got dressed today, but I do totally have on gym shoes, but it's the first time I've had on shoes in 3 days. So like, you know, like this is a, you know, we're playing a slightly different game than we have been, right? So I'm not spending, and I curled the front of my hair, but I didn't even bother with the back, right? Like who's going to see it besides my family, and they know. So, you know, there's a whole bunch of those little ways that we're cutting out times of our day, and we're actively interested in like connecting with people in a real way. And I think one of the reasons why angel investors do angel investing, I mean, there's lots of much better ways to build wealth. Like this is high risk, scary money for the most part. But angels do it because you get to crawl into somebody's dream and help them see it forward, right? You get to see so many cool things that people are really passionate about. Stuff is a lot of times really interesting, and you never know who's going to connect with what things, because sometimes it's not the business that I like, but it's the team, or sometimes, you know, like the technology is really cool, or, I mean, there's just a bunch of different ways that some of that stuff goes forward. But I suppose like Amy and Benton, you can give a nod. Like, are you guys doing a lot more meetings these days? Like a boatload more meetings, boatloads.
Yes.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that.
Yeah. So thank you for that. So there's a couple of questions. I want to just do some clarification. Yes, I did say investment thesis. So investment thesis is kind of like a mission statement for an investor. VC, if you go online, you're not going to find like somebody's like Amy Duncan, this is her investment thesis. It's going to be on her LinkedIn. Not necessarily. Some angel investors do, but VC funds typically have that. And for the founders out there and investors to see who you would syndicate with, you would see what are their portfolio companies. So if they have their portfolio companies all diverse founders, what do you think they invest in? Diverse founders. If they're all in healthcare, that's part of their investment thesis, is that they invest in healthcare companies. So you can do a little bit of searching and guerrilla tactics to find that out. And you can also go on angel lists too. Sometimes some of their portfolio companies are on there. So you can kind of get together what that investment thesis is. And that's what the question was, does the investment thesis change during COVID? And what we heard is just the mitigation of risk and asking more questions up front is you're going to be seeing a lot more of. And also, like for us, we double down on our due diligence just to make sure everything is, all the T's are crossed, all the I's are dotted a little bit more than typical, so that we know that this is a great investment to go into. So the next question, if you want to add to that, Misty, or you're good?
I think there's a couple of other tiny little things. So yeah. If we had more time to plan for moving to an online angel conference, we might have incorporated a few other like cool things that we've learned since. So the conference in SLO, they're going to run a crowdfunding campaign at the same time. And so they had originally, if they had more time, they would have set it up as a proper crowdfunding campaign. But instead, what they're going to do is they're going to run a GoFundMe campaign for their conference, and all of the money raised in their GoFundMe campaign the day of will go to the People's Choice Award for the day. Well, that was cool, right? So, and I think we will see a lot more crowdfunding campaigns coming together. I think there's some cool new tools out there that we're pretty excited about. And so I think you're going to see some additional new ways to, or where we start to blur the line between crowdfunding and angel investing, because there's some cool stuff. There's some cool stuff there that's different than Kickstarter and Indiegogo.
Love that. Yeah, we're rolling out our women's fast pitch in 5 regions in August. So that's a great addition to do that audience choice. So thank you for that, because we're building that out now. So wonderful. Thank you. So let me go to a couple of, there's 2 questions here. And I think I'll take Annie's first, and then I'll come back to you, Rose. I'm sorry, because we're on that aspect of founders. The question is, how do you recommend communicating financial projections, use of funds to an investor? What are the numbers in the spreadsheet you need to use as an investor to be confident to use of funds? Is there a template you recommend? And especially, we just talked about, let's say, having a use of funds during COVID, to be more specific, but let's just say in general, what would you recommend? And again, we're like 7 minutes to the end of our time together. So go, Misty.
Oh, shoot. I was going to see if I could pull something up real quickly. So I don't think there are certain things about use of funds that haven't changed. We still want to see 2/3 to 3/4 of the use of funds help to increase sales, right? So if I'm going to invest $100,000, I want to know in the next 18 to 24 months, the entrepreneur can turn it into $1 million. I can't think of a way you build a better product and launch it, and in that amount of time. I can't think of a financial instrument that you could use that you could do that quickly enough. It's still a sales related answer, right? So it's how is this investment overall going to mitigate your sales risk, especially in the early seed stage. We're trying to help you start into your hockey stick growth. And so I don't think that piece has changed that much. Does that answer that?
And maybe we can follow up with maybe some of the resources that you have that you were going to look up. We'll send out an email to everybody who was part of the call and just send that out. We usually do that anyways for our recording. So is that cool?
Yep.
Yes, awesome.
Put out a few things.
Yeah. So another question is, Rose brought it up. So thank you, Rose, for being part of the call. Are you familiar with an angel investing mentorship program for new angels? One answer is SDAC does serve as, let's say, an upswing of that education for new angels. But Misty, do you want to add to that?
TCA San Diego is a good place for you to get your feet wet. If you haven't done it before. Angel Capital Association is the other one. So I don't even think you have to be a member of the Angel Capital Association to go look at some of their online tutorials and their videos. Some of that stuff is just readily available. If you become a member of ACA, you get access to a whole bunch more stuff. If you're participating in the San Diego Angel Conference, you also become a member of the Angel Capital Association. So that's one of the things that we do as a group. We buy that membership. It's a little bit pricey. But we buy that, and then all of our investors get access to it. The question I didn't answer was on financial projections. Should I go back to that?
I think we have like 4 more minutes. There's a question there that would be really great to finish up with. Sorry, and I have everybody's questions on a document, so we will make sure that those get answered in the follow-up email. And if you're not getting our emails, just quickly put your email in the chat. And then Raven or April can get that email and send it out with everybody else. So the final question, and I really love this, and again, Annie put in the pitch event for LGBTQ in the chat, so capture that. This is, I love this, is that do virtual online pitches differ much from in-person pitches in terms of content or approach? So I can answer it, or Misty, I think that you should answer it because you're seeing a lot of it. I've seen a lot of virtual and in person, and I have my opinions about that. So Misty, you want to go first?
I think it's harder for a group. If you're pitching to a group, it's harder to do it. If everybody's in Zoom and you're doing it, it works fine. If you have some blended thing where some people are in person and other people are online, like that part doesn't work. When I'm just reviewing decks and coaching companies, I prefer to do Zoom. I'd rather not have somebody come in and do an in-person meeting, because this gives me the ability to feel like I'm looking over somebody's shoulder and we're like as if we are in front of the same screen talking through what we're looking at. So I actually prefer this mechanism. Now you lose, if you don't know the group well, you lose like all of the socialization things, the body language, like there's compromises, huge compromises for that. So double-edged sword, I think, but you can make it work,
Great. And I wanted to go back to Next Wave Impact Fund. We have our website also has great resources for investors, Rose, on different things. There's like 1-minute videos, 5-minute videos, and that was funded by the Kauffman Foundation. So they're good and solid, good, rich information, but mentoring, not as much. So I'm going to go back to about the pitching in person. Like the number one thing, and I always go for the small things and the big things. The small things is make sure that your thing works, your camera works. Because I've seen a lot of pitches that are like, oh, well, we don't have a camera. I'm like, get a computer that has a camera. Like, sorry, but you need to have your stuff get together. So founders that are out there, get a camera, or ask your friend to have a camera. You need to have that in person. So Misty said that in person is like kind of down whenever you're doing it virtually. Please have a camera. Make sure that you're like in the frame, that you are up in front and you are, you know, talking to the investor. Make sure you look at the little camera. Sometimes I'm like looking at myself and I'm like down here. It's like, no, you're up there. You want to look straight at the camera. So that's like 2 like really easy tips. And also if you are going to do a pitch, that sometimes whenever you have your view on the right hand side or wherever you are, just make sure you have more white space on your pitch deck. So those are kind of like tried and true little tips. The other thing is, you know, you've probably seen Zoom calls now over and over again that somebody's kind of like way back here and they're talking like this and they're like, my pitch is this and my company is this and I'm so excited and my customers are this and I'm making this amount of sales. Or, hello, my company is this and I'm passionate about this. My customers, the testimonials are through the roof. My sales are growing 3 after 3. I mean, that's compelling. You want that investor to absolutely love you, and so that you can get that next coffee meeting. And even if it's a coffee meeting is virtual, that's a win, right? So really being able to have that connection through the video is wonderful. And follow up through LinkedIn, any way you can, email, stalk them, right? So that's the benefit of actually being virtual, because you can quickly just immediately put it out there or put it in the chat. You're like, hey, this is who I am. If there's like 10 people pitching, you want to make sure that they know who you are in that chat. So those are like little things that are easy and a little harder stuff. So we are out of time. But Misty, thank you for being part of this call. This was super exciting. We need to do more of it. But every Monday we're back on 5 o'clock for COVID stuff that is on the front lines. And thank you, Misty.
Well, thanks so much. I wish you'd have given those tips like before I got started, because I feel like I would have done some things differently.
No. I'm just kidding.
It was great to see everyone, and hopefully we'll be able to connect in person again soon.
Wonderful. Thank you, Misty. Thanks for everybody being part of the call. We really appreciate you. And if you have any questions or comments on next iterations or next topics, please just reach out. We are here to be a resource to you. Thanks so much. Bye. Have a good night.